Okay, let us discuss Machiavelli in terms of two gods we are familiar with. This is Rama and this is Krishna. We know Rama is a very straightforward person. He's the one who honors his word. And Krishna does all kinds of things. Krishna lies, he cheats, deceives. Okay, but you can see in the end, Krishna delivers justice. Krishna cannot be cheated, only he can cheat others. So he doesn't go by a particular moral code that others follow. But it does not mean he doesn't have any morality. His moral code is informed by justice and compassion. But of course, mortals cannot follow Krishna completely because if we keep doing things the way Krishna does, we may be caught in between. We are lying, we are deceiving, we can be caught and punished. Whereas Krishna, because after all he's a god, he has control over things. In the end, he delivers justice and he is not caught in between. So this is a strange god. Whereas Rama is extremely rule oriented. And once he gives the word, he will follow. Even if the circumstances don't warrant. Okay. His father long ago gave one word to his wife, and now Rama wanted to honor that. Though his father was opposed to Rama going to the forest, and his brothers were opposed. In a similar situation, if Krishna was placed, Krishna would do something. Finally, he won't go to the forest. So these are two models that Indian tradition offers, Indian religion offers, Hinduism offers. Okay. And Machiavelli is very clearly for Krishna. But of course, nobody can be as bold as Krishna because Krishna is God and we are all mortals. Okay. So let us see. Of course, we can't say that a higher justice and compassion Krishna shows that Machiavelli has it. You can't say that. But Machiavelli is not calling for lawless, unjust state. It is not like that. He is looking for an order and some kind of justice, but he is only concerned that a particular understanding of moral code should not confine a king and make him like Rama. Okay. But of course, we have even worse example of what happens if somebody honors his own word. He is Satya Harishchandra. You know, Satya Harishchandra lost everything because he gave one promise and he didn't want to dishonor the promise. So he kept on giving his property, and finally he became this as a god. So this is what he became. So let us see what Machiavelli says about sticking to promises. Okay. First, he says what people do, or what some successful people did. He's saying the princes who have achieved great things have been those who have given their word lightly, who have known how to trick with their cunning, and who in the end have overcome those abiding by honest principles. So he's saying that first, don't think that if you dishonor, you will lose, you will fail. Because there are many who are successful who dishonored their word, is one thing. And next, saying, a prudent ruler cannot and must not honor his word when it places him at a disadvantage and when the reasons for which he made his promise no longer exist. Very important clause. Because men are wretched creatures who won't keep their word to you, and you need not keep your word to them. So this he is saying empirically, and this he is saying that others will break their promises, and if you keep, you will lose. Okay. And next he says, what actually appears to be ethical, what is okay, what is moral, what appears, or what is a virtue, what is a virtue. What is a virtue which appears to be a virtue may not be a virtue at all. That is another thing he is saying. What appears to be virtue may not be virtue. He gives an example of generosity. Okay. Because a prince cannot practice the virtue of generosity in such a way that he is noted for it. Generosity in such a way he is noted for it, except to his cost. He should, if he is prudent, not mind being called a miser. This is equivalent to saying not mind being called bad, or not minding being bad. And then he asks, he is called miser, but what is he? In time he will be recognized as being essentially generous man, seeing that because of his parsimony, his existing revenues are enough for him. He can defend himself against an aggressor, and he can embark on a campaign without burdening the people. So, the one who is being called miser is essentially generous man. So, what appears to be a virtue is not a virtue. This is what is meant by ethical reasoning. Okay. Then he talks about power. He says how to maintain power. Okay. Then he asks a question, it is better to be feared or than loved. Okay. What he says is, it is better to be feared than loved if you can't be both. That is, if you can both be feared and loved, that is good. But if it can't, better to be feared. Why so? For love is secured by a bond of gratitude, which men, wretched creatures that they are, break when it is to their advantage to do so. But fear is strengthened by a dread of punishment, which is always effective. So if you receive love, there is no guarantee that they will stick to you. But if you can fear them, frighten them, they will stick to you. This is how you keep your power secure. Okay. The prince must nonetheless make himself feared in such a way that if he is not loved, at least he escapes being hated. For fear is quite compatible with an absence of hatred. Machiavelli gives a lot of importance to not being hated by the people. To him, this is one very important criteria. So he discusses how to avoid being hated. These are the things he says that can cause hatred. He will be hated if he is rapacious and aggressive with regard to the property and the woman of his subjects. Let people feel safe about their property and the woman. Okay. And then he says positively, one man should not be afraid of improving his position, lest they be taken away from him, or another deterred by high taxes from starting a new business. Okay. So people feel safe about the property, about growth in property. And he also links this hatred with stability. He says, one of the most powerful safeguards a prince can have against conspiracies is to avoid being hated by the populace. This is because the conspirator always thinks that by killing the prince he will satisfy the people. But if he thinks that he will outrage the people, he will never have the courage to go ahead with his enterprise. So, and when prince has a goodwill of the people, he must not worry about the conspirators. But when the people are hostile and regard him with hatred, he must go in fear of everything and everything. Okay. So, what does people want according to Machiavelli? Property, secure. Woman, secure. There is peace. There are no high taxation. Okay. And when the prince dies, people should not feel happy. It is in these ways prince should rule. So he is not saying that enjoy power and do whatever you can with that. He's saying that this is the purpose. Or if not the purpose, it is in this way your power is safe. So he is not thinking of conflict between prince and people. He is thinking in terms of how the prince should make people happy. And this also involves stability. Okay. Security of life. Handling external threats. So Machiavelli is saying this is what people want and this is what you should give. And it is in their safety and security. Your power is safe. All this amounts to good advice. What is Machiavellian in this? This is how people should rule. And Machiavelli is proposing a moral code that makes such a rule possible. Okay. And he is saying to make such a rule possible, what kind of attitude king should have, what kind of capabilities king should have. So Machiavelli is giving an agenda in terms of what the king should have and why he should have them. Okay. Now, okay. And he is saying that to maintain power, law alone is not enough. Law alone is not enough. And why is it so? There are two ways of fighting, by law or by force. The first way is natural to men and second to beasts. But as the first way often proves inadequate, one needs to have recourse to the second. So a prince must understand how to make nice use of beast and the man. And what is this beast? A prince is forced to know how to act like a beast. He must learn from the fox and the lion. Because the lion is defenseless against traps and fox is defenseless against wolves. So basically, he's saying three things. Go by law. This is one. He's not saying against law. Go by law. But that is only one. Have strength. That means lion. But be prepared to employ strategies and tricks. Fox. Law alone can't. Strength alone can't. All three are important. Now, he is saying that he is not against being good, but one should be prepared to be bad. Here, yes. You should appear to be compassionate, faithful to his word, kind, guileless, and devout. So Machiavelli is saying that some of the virtues you need not have, or sometimes if you go by the virtues, it can be destructive. But whatever they are, Machiavelli thinks you should appear. You can't be critical of those virtues openly. But he's saying, and indeed he should be so. He should appear, and indeed he should be so. But his disposition should be such that if he needs to be the opposite, he knows how. Maybe this can be a kind of a summary on Machiavelli's teaching. And then a prince, and especially new prince, cannot observe all those things which give meaning to a meaning, which give man, a reputation for virtue. He should have flexible disposition, varying as fortune and circumstances dictate. Why new prince? Because new prince is facing a dynamic situation. And lot of moral code, problem with moral code is that it is for a static situation. And also to most or average. On average, the code is right. And for static situations. But Prince is deals with many unusual and dynamic situations. And particularly new Prince faces very difficult and unusual circumstances. So in an established kingdom, it may be easy to follow the code, but in a kingdom that is establishing itself, it is more difficult to follow the code. That's what he's saying. Next. He should not deviate from what is good if that is possible. But he should know how to do evil. The point. Then a certain contemporary ruler never preaches anything except peace and good faith. But he is an enemy of both, one and the other. And if he had ever honored either of them, he would have lost either his standing or his state many times over. So he is preaching them, but not following them, because of which he is in power and his state is secure. If he was otherwise, he would have lost. Okay. One very important thing about Machiavelli is that he makes these statements, but with each statement, he gives lot of examples from history. I would say that is his methodology. For example, arguing in favor of how fear is more important than love in case there is conflict, Machiavelli says this. He's giving an example of Hannibal. Among the admirable achievements of Hannibal is included this, that although he had a huge army made up of countless different races, on foreign campaigns there was never any dissension. For this, his inhuman cruelty was responsible. It had not been for his cruelty, his other qualities would not have been enough. The historians, having given little thought to this, on the one hand admire what he achieved, on the other condemn what made his achievement possible. So what is he doing? He is giving examples. It means his method is comparative, historical, empirical, but value neutral. Okay. His book is full of examples like this. And he takes them from the contemporary world or from history. He's a very knowledgeable person. So arguing that this is what contributed to success. So people prize generosity, but he is saying he is cruel, and cruelty helped him in military victories. Otherwise, with such diverse army, he wouldn't have been successful. And he's saying historians missed the role of cruelty. So this is what is called scientific approach. You are just looking at the variables, attitudes, and success. Historical comparative. You are not saying that kings should have compassion and great kings had compassion and so you should have compassion. No. Machiavelli thinks all of them are assumptions. Whereas the life is like this. So this is empiricism. And then he says, and sometimes even good deeds can get hatred. So one should be careful. It should be noted that one can be hated just as much for good deeds as for evil ones. How whenever that class of men on which you believe your continued rule depends is corrupt, on whom you are depending is corrupt, whether it be the populace or soldiers or nobles, you have to satisfy it by adopting the same disposition, and then good deeds are your enemies. So it means because your power depends on others, which includes population. Population wants certain things which you think are bad, but they want, so you should, or you may need to. Otherwise, it leads to hatred. So this means you should be prepared to do bad things. That is the point. Because even others don't want you to do good things, or that you depend on people who are willing to do bad things. So basically, he is asking you to think about what is good, what is bad, why you need to do bad, or why you may be forced to do bad, and how this is related to power. Which means don't equate goodness with power. No. Don't equate goodness contributes to power. Don't equate these two. So basically, Machiavelli is asking the prince to think. This is one interesting thing. This is about what kind of people you should have. And he says you shouldn't have people who only flatter you. But it doesn't mean anybody can criticize. The only way to safeguard yourself against flatterers is by letting people understand that you are not offended by the truth. Okay, this is good. But if everyone can speak the truth to you, then you lose respect. A shrewd policy should adopt a middle way, choosing wise men for his government and allowing only those the freedom to speak the truth to him, and then only concerning matters on which he asks their opinion and nothing else. So you can say this is a policy or a guideline on free speech. Interesting. And then he says, this is an interesting observation. He says sometimes there will be fanatics. It should be noted that princes cannot escape death if the attempt is made by a fanatic, because anyone who has no fear of death himself can succeed in inflicting it. So a fanatic who doesn't fear death can inflict easily. And the prince should restrain himself from inflicting grave injury on anyone in his service whom he has close to him in his affairs of the state. This really reminded me of what Indira Gandhi did. After Operation Blue Star, she was advised to remove these Sikh security guards from her home. But then she refused. So she didn't see that these communities badly hurt and they might do this. So Prince is has such insights. And then in the end, if one follows all these principles, can one be successful? Machiavelli says there is a role of fortune. Okay. And what is the role of fortune? I believe it is probably true that fortune is the arbiter of half the things, leaving the other half or so to be controlled by ourselves. So 50% fortune and 50% our effort. But here, fortune is not pure luck, it is about circumstances. As fortune is changeable, whereas men are obstinate in their ways. Men prosper so long as fortune and policy are in accord. And when there is a clash, they fail. So he's saying fortune as circumstances over which you have no control. And when there is such a thing, you should change the policy. And when you don't change, you suffer. So, by responding to change in circumstances, you can manage fortune. That's what he's saying. And he says, God doesn't want to do everything himself and take away from us our free will and our share of the glory which belongs to us. Okay. So here he uses the word God.